Okay, I realize this subject is, well, it's subjective. I've seen comments from people just gushing over the looks of a vehicle whose design I find rather strange, to put it nicely. So don't worry guys, I'm not putting the SSR on this list, though most people would. It is an odd design and not a good one in my opinion, but it doesn't quite reach the point of what I'm calling ultimate ugly. So how can we define an ugly car? I think there's a few helpful points. One, ugly car designs are often ones that are incoherent or inconsistent with unproportional or out of balance aspects. Again, not including this vehicle, but think of a car like the Crossley Hotshot. It just looks silly with the proportions of the body to the wheels, but sometimes a car can be truly, unmistakably, objectively ugly, but have quite a coherent design language, as long as the overall design is bad enough. One such car is quite high on this list. I will say I feel like my list is somewhat unique. I looked at quite a few of these lists, and many of the cars that people include, say the Suzuki X90 or the AMC Pacer or the Nissan Stanza wagon, these are pretty cute cars, and for some reason we often equate cute with ugly. Not everything has to be big and imposing. Also, apologies in advance if you daily drive one of the cars on this list. I truly do feel bad for you. No, in all seriousness, sometimes ugly vehicles are good vehicles. Now, narrowing this list down to just 10 was nigh impossible, so we're kicking things off with a short list of honorable mentions. The first honorable mention is the Triumph TR7. Not only was this a horrible turn in a conforming direction for Triumph at a time when they really did need a great design, the whole wedge aesthetic, it just isn't executed very well here. It's definitely the ugliest wedge design from this era, and it's just so out of line with their own design language as a company. You know, your history as a company matters, especially when it comes to design. Second, we also have to mention Ferrari's latest iteration of the F-Line, the F80. Not only a miss in terms of the iconic older cars like the F40 and F50 and staying in that design language, but as it stands, it just looks like a Lego Technic. It doesn't look real. It looks like some sort of strange AI render, and it certainly doesn't look good. Maybe we will all change our tune in 30 years about this car. That is very possible, but for now, it's pretty dang ugly. And the last honorable mention, the Nissan Juke. Now, this design, yeah, it is bad. You know, the headlights, all of it. I know it's an ugly car. Now, it is an ugly car, but there's something I like about it. I can't quite put my finger on it. Certainly, it belongs on a list like this, but I'm putting it in the honorable mentions because of that intangible thing that I sort of like about it. Now, let's start with number 10. Most lists place the Pontiac Aztek right at the top or near the top, and you know, I think the hate is a little bit unwarranted. It is an ugly design, don't get me wrong, and in many ways, this design kind of predicted the oncoming crossover SUV, tall, stubby vehicle design language. So in some ways, I do admire the Aztek and those involved, but there's no ignoring the fact that it is not pretty. What's interesting about this design is just how chaotic it is. Just this weird blend of angles and very strange proportions. Originally, in its prototype form, the Aztek was meant to combine the ruggedness of an SUV with the practicality of a van, and as a vehicle, it actually did that pretty well. And early on, the concept version was much more modern looking and has aged much better, but the bean counters over at GM got way too involved, and they essentially tried to corporatize the design language, making it less offensive. In all reality, all they did was make it just incoherent and awful. The stance got really weird and off. The production Aztek ended up looking like the awkward sibling of its original concept. I'm hoping to make a full-length video about the story behind the Aztek at some point, because this was kind of a fun, weird period in American automotive design, and sadly this car would lead to the death of Pontiac as we know it. Now, at number 9, we've got another Pontiac, and this is the Transport and all of its other iterations. This honestly is the first vehicle that popped into my head when I started thinking about this topic. You know, there are great automotive designs that they define us 90s kids in our childhood. Think like the C4 Corvette and the F-150, for example. And then there's the Shark van, as we call them. These were everywhere, and I'm sorry if you owned a few of them or own one currently. They're just quite ugly. They're unique in a bad way. The original attempt with this design was a aerodynamic feel that no minivan had had before. Attempted futuristic designs often fall into this trap of kind of extremism. Pontiac was on their way out at this point, totally lost in terms of their own design language and really their place in the market. And the Transport, though a good van and a lot of people owned them, in terms of design, they showed that Pontiac had kind of lost it. For number 8, let's go back in time a bit to the 1950s and the iconic failed Ford project known as the Edsel. This $350 million failure, the equivalent of $2.8 billion today, was ugly, very ugly, and in some ways it suffered a similar corporate problem in terms of the design as the Aztek. In building this luxury brand, Ford's design department pulled consumers like never before, and the car ended up being this strange amalgamation of different bits of design that Ford thought people wanted, from the toilet seat grille to the exaggerated bodywork and excessive chrome even for this era. Bold and flashy works, especially at this time, but somehow Ford took it too far by again failing to make the design feel coherent, unlike, say, Cadillacs from this time. Rather than a true luxurious feel, the Edsel kind of looked like a parody of luxury vehicles from this time. Now, Honda may have tried to make us forget just how ugly the original Honda Ridgeline was by making it, conform to modern truck design, but we enthusiasts never forget a bad truck design, and that's exactly what it was. Now, you might point to the Avalanche, which came out quite a bit before the Ridgeline, and for sure, this bed feature is unappealing in general, but for me, there's something charming about the Avalanche. The Ridgeline looks so odd because it was the first unibody truck, and like the modern Ford Maverick, you have to have different types of pillars for structural purposes when you're using a unibody construction versus a body on frame. This was built on the same platform as the Odyssey and the Pilot, and so the Ridgeline looked less like a purpose-built truck and more like a van or an SUV that was sort of morphed into a truck thing. It's pretty bad. Now, I know lots of people love Ridgelines, and again, I'm not saying that it's a bad vehicle because it's ugly, it's just an ugly vehicle. Few cars have been as universally mocked for their appearance as the Fiat Multipla. This late 1990s, early 2000s compact car took practicality to an extreme, but it sacrificed all sense of visual harmony. And it would have been higher on my list if it didn't also make you kind of go, "Aww." But what makes it ugly? Of course, it's the two-tiered headlights, the most infamous feature of the Multipla. This split headlight design, where one set of lights sits awkwardly below the windshield while the other is positioned, where they would traditionally be. This gives it kind of a stacked face look, like an amphibian mid-metamorphosis. The cab forward design and tall, rounded roofline make the car look like it's constantly puffing its cheeks out. Now, this is all great for interior space, but the short and stubby proportions make it look so odd. To Fiat's credit, the Multipla was pretty revolutionary, at least on the inside, with 3 across front seating and incredible practicality. But that didn't stop it from looking like a genetic experiment gone wrong. Now, if you're like me, when you think of Mercedes, you think of sleek, sophisticated automotive designs. But the R-Class was an unfortunate departure from that tradition. It attempted to blend luxury, but also like minivan practicality and SUV capability. But the end result was a vehicle that looked like it couldn't decide what it wanted to be. The R-Class is technically not a minivan, but its egg-shaped profile and long stretched-out body just kind of screams mom-mobile, rather than luxury grand tourer, which was probably the idea behind it. The headlights and grille look generic, almost like an E-Class wagon that's kind of just been inflated a little bit. And its long nose and massive rear overhang make it too long for what it is. Despite its ugly duckling status, the R-Class was an excellent long-distance cruiser, and it was popular, especially in China, but on Western roads, it really looked out of place and just out of proportion. At the number 4 spot, we have the Tetra 603. Now, I'll admit it's hard for me to put a classic car like this so high on the list, but my God, what is going on with this design? Tetra is an interesting brand in its own right, and for this model, they were really trying to innovate and make a very forward-thinking luxury car. This is a common theme among ugly cars through history. The problem with the 603 is pretty much everything. Early models had a cluster of 3 headlights in the center, giving the car this sort of permanently surprised expression. The rounded, stretched out body makes it look bloated, kind of like it's melting in the sun. And because it had a rear-mounted air-cooled V8, the Tatra's rear end had an awkward overhang that made it just look so unbalanced. I would love to hear from all the Tatra fanboys out there. You guys who go to Tatra meetups and drool over each other's weird Czechoslovakian cars. But yeah, otherwise I'm pretty convinced it's not a good design. Also, hopefully I'm saying the name of this automotive brand right, because otherwise that's kind of embarrassing. All right, number 3 goes to the Ford Scorpio, and specifically the second generation Ford Scorpio. This is one of the strangest design missteps in history. The first generation was a really respectable kind of executive sedan, but the front end redesign for this generation was beyond horrible. And what's so bad is how subtle and how subtly bad the design is. It's not over the top like, say, the Edsel or really any of the bad designs on here. It's almost normal, but that's what's so bad about it. That bit of offness is enough to almost disturb you. The slightly oval-shaped headlights make it look like a fish gasping for air, giving it a permanently shocked expression. The whole front end is blobby. I mean, if cars have expressions, this one is basically like permanently bewildered. That's what it looks like. All right, at number 2, we have the Cybertruck. And I'll be honest, I wanted to put this at number 1, and maybe in 30 years looking back, we'll have enough time with it to put it at the number 1 spot. But, it's too soon, and I don't think it's fair. The design is out there enough, to qualify, but there are some angles that the Cybertruck doesn't look completely horrible. And I do give Tesla credit for creating an entirely different kind of design. But with that being said, the Cybertruck is without a doubt one of the worst designs in automotive history. And the fact that there's almost no function to the design and to this extreme design, it makes it that much worse. When something is ugly because it is functional, oftentimes it will kind of become good looking. That's not the case with the Cybertruck. Now, there's lots of things wrong with it. It does look like a hotel ice machine or dumpster on wheels. Yeah, the stainless steel is weird. But for me, overall, it's just this giant triangle shape that, especially from the side, and especially when you see it in real life, looking at pictures and videos don't do it justice. When you see this thing out among normal cars, it's just so ridiculous. Like, I can't fathom how this design made it to production. It has such an unfinished feeling, the proportions are weird. It looks so strange, so back heavy, and not in a good way. Not back heavy done right like the Jaguar XKE. This is not that. And I think many are feeling the same way about this vehicle. People are sick of it. There is zero hype. It just screams pretension at this point, and sales are plummeting. So if you have a low-mile Cybertruck, don't sell it right now. Listen to me. Lock it up in a climate-controlled garage, put a tarp on it, and in 50 years, you'll get your money's worth for it. I promise. Because bad vehicles that don't sell well, but are crazy unique and are telling of the times, they often become worth something later on. Regardless, horrible design. Number 1 on my list goes to the SsangYong Rodius. Now, if ever there was a car that made zero sense visually, it's the SsangYong Rodius. Designed in the early 2000s with the intention of being a luxury MPV, it ended up looking like a collection of unrelated car parts just kind of stitched together by somebody who'd never seen a car before. The rear of the Rodius is really its worst crime. This weird drooping tail section that looks kind of like a minivan mid-crash into an SUV. The awkward mismatched glass design makes it seem like SsangYong just kind of ran out of ideas halfway through drawing it up. While some ugly cars at least have a theme, the Rodius just looks completely random, like it was designed by committee members who never spoke to each other. And because of all of this, the Rodius became kind of a legendary meme in the car world. I just want a behind-the-scenes look at how this design came together, because it truly is unbelievable, and it's at the number 1 spot for ugliest car of all time, at least in my book. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed this. You know how it is. We would love to hear your lists and your own thoughts. Let us know in the comments below, and until next time, drive safe.